I've released a brand new course called the 5-Minute Music Producer. The 5-Minute Music Producer gets you a new music-making activity every single day for a whole year. You can join month by month or sign up for the whole year at once. If you've ever struggled with coming up with ideas, writer's block, remembering your ideas when it's time to make music, having inspiration, or just having clear workflows for making music, then this is the course for you. Each day you'll get a new activity that will help you write more music, make better lyrics, develop solid workflows, learn techniques for generating ideas, and giving you a process that you can rely on. Professional music producers can't wait for inspiration to strike when it's time to make music. They have to get to work all the time, so they have routines and workflows that they count on. This course will help you build those routines and workflows that will make sure that your inspiration is always at hand and you can make more music all the time. Each daily activity takes only about 5 minutes to do, so even when you're not feeling like making music, you can still probably commit to a couple minutes. And you'll be surprised how often that those couple minutes turn into a full session because you get inspired. Sometimes you got to get the momentum going before things start happening. And the 5-Minute Music Producer is designed to help you do just that. So if you want to try it out, the first week is totally free. You'll get 7 of these lessons that will help set you up with some cool workflows. And if you like it, stay aboard and enjoy the ride. You can sign up for the 5-Minute Music Producer at brianfunk.com/5minutes. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. On today's show, I have Keppie Coutts is back. And Keppie has, I guess, kind of like a couple dubious distinctions here on the show now, because I think you're the most recent repeat guest, because we only spoke a couple months ago. And also, I think you're the guest that cost me the most money in book purchases. So heads up to anyone watching this. I think I said 4 books from the time we spoke, whether it was through our conversation or just watching your YouTube channel, How to Write Songs, which is really an awesome YouTube channel. I recommend it to anyone that's interested in writing music. It's so many great ideas and demonstrations, and also just a nice way of putting labels on things that I've done and thought about in the past, and then highlighting things I never thought about in the past that make songs better. So it's great to have you back, Keppie. Welcome.
Yeah, it's so nice to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, sorry, I'm going to start. Even the one thing you said has inspired a whole train of thought there. But, this idea of putting labels to things that you might already do intuitively, but what the value is of actually being able to name it. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, one of the things that we were talking about earlier is the idea that, the first line of your song is really important, and not just the first line of your song, but in fact the first line of any of the sections is really important. And actually, in terms of the psychology of language and communication, people, which is to say listeners or an audience, will almost always pay more attention to the first and last thing that is said or done. And that is not just a feature of music or songwriting, it's also just generally a feature of human communication. Impressions. So exactly, first impressions count, they loom large, but also by the same token, so does the last thing that people see or hear or experience. And in the field of psychology, it has a label, it's called the Primacy and Recency effect, which is to say people simply pay more attention to and remember more acutely the first and last thing that happens. And I often run this memory experiment in my classes. The first thing I do in any songwriting class I'm teaching is I run a memory experiment. And what I do is basically read out a list of 12 words that seem random, and they are randomized, but they're not random. What's really happening is that half of the list of words are kind of concrete, specific, tangible, sensory nouns, and the other half are kind of abstract nouns. And so one really fascinating thing that happens, is that almost always 95% of people will always remember more of the concrete nouns rather than the abstract nouns. And the thing there is that the ordering is randomized. So it's not a matter of people remembering things because of the order. It's a feature of the human brain's relationship to concrete sensory language, right? Which is actually like a really important lesson in lyric writing, like how people respond more emotionally to essentially imagery, but like multi-sensory imagery. However, an offshoot of that experiment, which is just psychologically interesting but has this application to songwriting, is this primacy and recency. So if I read out a list of 12 things to you, you would almost always remember the very first thing, but you are more likely to remember the last thing than you are to remember like the seventh thing in the list. Right? So, and it kind of makes sense, right? It's like, well, yes, because it's the most recent thing that I've said. So your short-term memory is still active. You know, it's still paying attention to the last thing. It has rehearsed the first thing. So that's, you know, the rehearsal of the first word is what drives it into the memory. But the recency of the last thing is what keeps it alive right there. But everything in the middle becomes muddy. You know, and so interestingly, in this like list of 12 words, right, like, you know, it's sort of mostly people remember the concrete specific words, but also they will probabilistically remember the first and the last word. Now, that to me is a really interesting concept, right, to go, okay, well, if we actually understand consciously that people pay more attention to the first and last thing of any kind of chunk of information, then we can use that as songwriters and specifically as lyric writers or even like producers and kind of making musical decisions to say the first thing that happens in a section is going to have more weight and have more impact on a listener. And so as a lyric writer, right, like the thing that you're referencing or were referencing to me earlier is one of the videos on the YouTube channel. I go deeply into this idea of the first line with a bunch of strategies. Okay, how do you make the first line compelling and interesting and grabbing? Because it has this natural spotlight shining on it. And so if you don't fill it with something that deserves that spotlight, you're kind of wasting an opportunity. And actually, if your first line doesn't sort of contain some degree of tension, the rest of the lines are going to have to work really, really hard, you know. But if your first line kind of is captivating, and to me, captivating is actually a fairly easy concept. Like for me, captivating is like, okay, just don't make it a cliche and don't make it a generality, you know. And if you avoid those two things, then your first line is likely to be compelling and draw someone into the story. The same thing is true with the last line of any section. So all of this is broadly to say, right, to be conscious and aware of these concepts, you might actually go, oh, okay, if I understand this concept of what I call, and I borrowed this terminology from my lyric writing teacher, Pat Patterson, who I studied with at Berklee and who's written fantastic books on lyric writing.
One of which I bought.
Excellent. I'm interested to hear your experience with it. So he calls this concept power positions, so that the first line and last line are the natural power positions of any section. And so if you have that language, right, as soon as you go, oh, I can call it something, I know what it is, suddenly you can more consciously and deliberately reach for that thing. And for me, it's very much like if we think about chords, right? Like I might be playing a chord progression and, you know, in my early days as a songwriter, before I knew anything about music theory, like I knew how to make all sorts of chords on the guitar. You know, I could make crazy chords on the guitar, but I actually didn't understand enough or anything about music theory to understand like what key I'm in. And so I may have luckily slapped some chords together because I had borrowed them from some, like, you know, I had like a busker's handbook, you know, and I would just open it to like, you know, American Pie and play through the chord progression and go like, oh, I like those chords, and then flip to another page and go, and I'm going to chuck in an E flat major 7 sharp 9, I don't know, like, you know, chuck in and be like either, no, that doesn't sound good, or, oh, it does sound good. But it's this real trial and error process where, you know, you're slapping things together. And so I'm talking about me, I would kind of slap things together and hope for the best. But then as soon as you learn about music theory and as soon as you learn about keys and like identifying what key you're in, then all of a sudden you can make more conscious decisions, right? Then it's not random and you know, if you're just doing things kind of randomly and stumbling upon things that work, you don't necessarily know why they work. And when you don't know why they work, you can't make the same decision again. Like you can't understand the underlying principle of why something works and therefore use the principle but not just merely imitate exactly what you did, right? Like if I'm in the key of, let's say, C major and I hit an E flat major chord and I go, ooh, wow, that sounds interesting and unusual, you know, in the key of C, yes, it does. But if you don't understand why that particular chord sounds nice in relationship to the key of C, all you're ever going to be able to do is reach for an E flat major chord, except that, you know, if I'm in the key of D major and I try and play an E flat major chord, well, that might sound crap. And you know, I might not understand why. Or even to be like, okay, even if I intuitively understand, well, actually it's because I'm playing the flat 3 major and it's a non-diatonic chord. It's borrowed from a parallel minor. And oh, okay, if I don't actually know any of that, right? So actually cancel that. This is to say, if I don't know the concept or the principle of borrowing chords from the parallel minor, all I'm ever going to be able to do is play the flat 3 major. You know what I mean? And be like, okay, right, maybe I am in the key of D major and I understand at least the distance relationship between the chord, and I go, all right, well, how do I recreate that cool sound? Okay, I'm going to play an F major chord. Okay, yes. Well, that might be good, but understanding the actual principle of modal borrowing is the much bigger pool of music theory that, like, once you have that name, once you can identify that concept, now I can use the concept but make other decisions, if that makes sense, right? So like this concept of modal borrowing to go, oh, the flat 3 major sounds so good because it's borrowed from the parallel minor. And if I understand that concept and that language and have that bit of information, now I can use the principle and say, all right, well, if the principle is borrowing from the parallel minor, now I'm no longer just restricted to reaching for the flat 3. Now I can reach for the flat 6 major, the flat 7 major, right? Like now I can reach for other decisions that are from the same concept, but allow me other options that are still going to work and kind of work for the same reasons. Sorry, so I know that was a super long rant based on your brief introduction to the concept, but to me there's something really powerful about naming something so that you understand not just the kind of surface level thing that's going on, but the principle underlying that, and then that lets you reach for other things drawn from the principle, right? So end of rant based on your very brief introduction there.
So as I was saying, our guest is Keppie. Yeah, it's great. You know, there's so much information coming out of you right now. And this idea, this last one you just brought up, is something that I kind of only came across recently. So I had these like tricks I knew I could do. Like I knew I could take like the 4 chord and make it minor, and that has that kind of like bittersweet feeling. I didn't know why. And there were some chords I could throw in, didn't know why. But it was actually watching Jake Lizio, guitar teacher on YouTube, Signals Music Studio.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, he's awesome. I love him. And he broke this down, the borrowed chords thing, and then showed like the modes and everything. And the modes were just, to me, really until I got an Ableton Push, they were just the major scale. I didn't even understand what the point of them were until I had the push and started treating that, you know, whatever note the particular mode starts on as the root. Then I started to understand. But hearing him put that label on there and say, this is what you're doing, you know, these chords that don't belong in the scale, they do belong for a reason. It's because you're borrowing them. And then explaining that you can jump into the different mode as if I'm soloing or writing melodies. And then it's like, oh, wow, not only do I have this chord, but now I got this other palette of notes I can throw in there.
Yeah. And then like the deeper level, right, of having access to that information is then knowing why you're doing something and like what effect that it has emotionally or in terms of the storytelling component of your song. And when I say storytelling, I don't mean just the lyrics. I mean the musical storytelling, like the journey of the song. So, you know, once you're in the world of modal borrowing, like, so say for example, I'm in a minor key, like say I'm in A minor and my chords are all in A minor. I know what A minor is. And then suddenly in the key of A minor, I play an A, B, C, D. I play a D dominant 7 chord. And I go, ooh, that's really nice. Well, it is nice. And the reason why it sounds good in a minor key is because it's actually a Dorian chord. It's borrowed from the parallel Dorian. So Dorian is a minor mode, but it's not the same as the regular natural minor mode. The thing about Dorian, and none of this stuff is complicated. I also just want to say to anyone that's like watching or listening, we're going down music theory. For anyone that's having a little moment of being like, oh God, modes, blah, blah, blah. You know, I always say, look, modes are not just for witches and wizards. You know, it's like not just jazz musicians and film composers. They're really, really accessible and easy to understand, you know? And so the only thing that's different about Dorian is that it contains a natural 6. So in the minor scale, normally we have a flat 3, a flat 6, and a flat 7. That's kind of what gives the minor scale its darkness, you know? But what Dorian does is instead of having that flat 6, it'll have a natural 6. And so what does that do to the minor scale to have a natural 6 in there? Well, it injects this brightness. So the Dorian mode is a beautiful mode because it has all the sort of richness and pathos and darkness and emotiveness of the minor scale, but with this little injection of brightness on the natural 6. And for me, you know, the imagery that always comes to mind with the Dorian scale is almost like a Van Gogh painting. It's like the Starry Night painting. It has all the kind of like dark indigo purples and blues of the minor scale with this like bright shining kind of yellow blob in the corner, which is the natural 6. So it kind of, to me, it's this beautiful scale. And so this kind of natural 6, what happens, let's go back to this kind of chordal songwriting hypothetical situation where I'm in the key of A, right? I'm in the key of A minor, but then I suddenly play a D dominant 7 chord. Well, the reason, normally in A minor, that should be a D minor chord. That would be diatonic to A minor, right? Diatonic meaning in the key of. But if I play an A dominant 7, well, it actually contains that natural 6. That's what gives it that sound. It actually has a major triad in it rather than a minor triad in it. And the major triad has the natural 6 in it. So it turns out that A dominant 7 is a Dorian chord, right? And so once you go down the path of modal borrowing and have that language and start to explore the other modes, well, then you can start saying why. Like, yes, it sounds good, but why? Why does it sound good? Because it injects this brightness into an otherwise quite sort of dark minor landscape. And it's, do you know what I mean? So now we're not just kind of even working at the level of the mathematics of modes and modal borrowing. Now where you can start to actually feel something and go, what do I want to achieve at this moment? What I want to do is add in some brightness, right? So how am I going to do it? Well, then you can actually eventually kind of categorize in your mind, well, like, all right, if I'm in a minor mode, if I actually borrow something from the Dorian mode that contains that natural 6, it's going to add brightness. It's going to make my song sound like a Van Gogh painting. You know, so there's also this more kind of feel aspect, right? Once you kind of play with these concepts of, you know, yes, there's the intellectual component, but then you can actually start to know what to draw on in order to create the story that you want to create or the textures that you want to create in the song that you're writing.
That's a really good example of what I enjoy about what you and Benny do on the channel is you're taking the theory, but you're never losing sight of the whole point of all of this is the emotional impact. That we're just using the theory as a tool for emotional impact. We're just trying to get to that. And he did a great video on guitar himself where he was playing through the different chords and I think just a major scale. And like this one is home, you know, this is your root, it's home. This one's like we're leaving home. This one's like we're coming back home. And it connected to me with like an experience I had when I first got a harmonica. And when you get a harmonica, the fun thing you realize, if it's like a C major harmonica, is that you can't really play a bad note. And if you blow out, it fits over like your C, your F, your A minor. And if you breathe in, it's the more like the tensor chords, the D minor, the F, and all that. And for me with the harmonic, it always felt like, all right, I'm breathing in, that's tension. breathe out, that's release, and that's the home chords. And he did a really nice job just explaining, like, here's what we're going for, and then explained how you can, start substituting. But you guys never lose sight of that, like, we're using these ideas not to be fancy jazz musicians or to throw stuff in, because, we'll talk about some of the music that you've just released too. It's not music you're going to listen to and be like, well, obviously Keppie's a music theory nerd and she went to jazz school, and no one's going to think that. It's very natural sounding and everything flows into everything else nicely, and the motions are there. That's the big thing, I think. That's the thing to keep in mind, is that every decision you're doing is for some sort of emotional impact. And if you're writing this dark minor song, but you want the little ray of sunshine coming through, now you know what tool to access. Well, I can bring in like that major chord from the Dorian in that case, or it could be lots of places really, but now you have all these options.
Oh, totally. And whenever I am teaching a songwriting class, I always draw that distinction between music theory and songwriting to say, like, they are not the same thing. Like, there are people with PhDs in music theory who can't write a song. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you can't equate those two things. It's like knowing more music theory is not going to make you a better songwriter. I'm not anti-music theory, obviously, right? Like, I love music theory. I love understanding it. Like, we've been just talking for 15 minutes about how great it is to, like, be able to name something. But to me, it's really important for me and for my students to understand that the music theory kind of column of information is not the same as the songwriting craft column of information. And to me, music theory is really like, okay, what are the colors that you have on your palette? But over here in songwriting is like, and what do you do with them? And it all has to come down to, what do you do with what you've got? It's not just what you've got. It's what you do with what you've got. And that's really the creativity aspect, right? That's like, you can be a great songwriter with very little music theory, actually. And like, knowing more, yes, it gives you more options. And knowing what you're doing with what you've got, I think, is important. And just as you're referencing that video that Benny made just on like the major key, right, is kind of going even in that. I mean, it's one thing to kind of look up the chords in any key, which you can Google, but that doesn't tell you what like why you would play one chord or the other. Like, it doesn't tell you what the impact is. If I'm in the key of C, but I start on an E minor chord and then an A minor chord and then an F chord and then I land on a C, that is a different story. That's a different musical story than starting on the C chord and then playing an E minor chord and an A minor chord and then landing on a G chord. Like, that's a different musical story. It has a different effect. It's literally just, it's telling a different story musically than the other one. So simply knowing the chords in a key doesn't tell you why, why you would choose one or the other and what story that's telling. So that's always important to me to sort of go, it's kind of more important as a songwriter to think about how you're using what you've got rather than having the longest list of music theory concepts under your belt. Like, I do believe in always learning more music theory and deepening that and giving yourself more options, but you certainly don't need that to write great songs. But I think you do need to know a bit about, like, whatever you do have under your belt, like knowing about that and knowing why you would choose those things. And exactly as you said, kind of, it's always about that. It's always about the storytelling to me, the storytelling and the emotion and the emotional connection. And honestly, like 95% of pop music, and by pop I don't just mean like pop as a genre, I kind of mean just like charting songs in any genre, are basically only going to use the major scale. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're not full of complex music theory at all. They're not even the 7 chords in a key. They're usually just 4 or 5 chords in a key. So, right. But they're put together in often like clever ways, and the songs that are really have like really good songcraft to them are telling a story with those 4 or 5 chords. Yeah.
Well, when you know what to place them in a spot in your song for, they become really powerful tools. I think when I was younger, I would come up with my chords and my songs, and whatever emotion I got is what I then steered towards. But the change and the growth has been being able to decide where I'm going to take the emotion instead of
Right.
just like, oh, these chords sound cool together, so now I got to make a song that has this feeling. Instead of like, hey, we need like a twist here. We need like a drop in energy or more tension or something along those lines.
Totally. And you know, just the thing that you just said, I think is really great, because it's not to say that you should be like activating music theory brain when you start writing a song. And often to me, like I find that a detriment, and people often ask me, you know, I think there's kind of this idea of like, okay, if I learn music theory, is that anti-creative? Is that going to be, am I going to be all kind of left brain, you know, in the writing process, and is that going to kind of remove the creative, intuitive, emotional aspect to it? And it's interesting, like my answer might surprise you, because to a certain extent, like, yes, it does. And I've experienced that, like, because I learnt music theory on the guitar, it's very difficult for me to play the guitar without the music theory brain sparking away in the background. Do you know what I mean? It's very difficult for me to lay my hands on the guitar and kind of not know exactly what I'm doing. Which I feel is kind of a liability sometimes, right? And so for me, like often I will nowadays, in the past couple of years, write on the piano. And piano is different for me because, look, I can play the piano and I know music theory, so I can turn on that part of my brain, but it's just a little bit different. Like piano is something where you can just kind of like put your hands down and make a random chord, but I can't do that on the guitar. Do you know what I mean? Like I sort of could, but you know, like the shapes kind of are much more muscle memory for me. So on the piano, I have less muscle memory, and it means I can engage kind of randomness. But exactly as you said, like for me, the joy of it is like I might do something random and not be thinking necessarily about like, what's the relationship of these chords to the key? I might just find like a combination of chords and sounds that is pleasing to me, but it's then about what happens next. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, great. Once I've written one section, knowing music theory, then I can go, all right, so now that I'm here at this place in the song, let me take a step back and now figure out what key I'm in. And if I'm in that key, what are the relationships of the chords? And if I know that, I'm much more empowered to know what to do next. To go, all right, now I've reached the end of this section. I now want to go, let's say, for example, to a pre-chorus, right? And so what do I want to achieve in the pre-chorus? Well, maybe in this pre-chorus, I want to achieve a sense of changing my mind, or like starting to introduce new possibilities. And maybe that involves musically, okay, well now it needs to be have some tension in it, but it's not going to be dark tension. I want it to be bright. Do you know what I mean? And so knowing music theory then enables me to go, okay, now it's not just about random, you know, throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. It's kind of like, now I can make some conscious decisions. I'm like, okay, if I'm in this key and it's a minor key, now I can use that Dorian chord. You know what I mean? Like I can introduce some brightness, and that 4 dominant 7, it's going to contain tension because it's not the home chord, it's an away chord, but it's a bright chord, and it's kind of a positive, you know what I mean? It might give me that story if that's where I want to go. So I totally agree that, you know, for me, the songwriting process is like funnest and happiest when it involves a little bit of letting go of the left brain music theory, but then engaging it in order to make decisions, you know, when I need to do something or I want to go somewhere else. I now know what my choices are and why, for the most part, you know, but
yeah, because it's easy to get that, like, you know, music is so weird because it's so emotional, and it's also like math, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like there's a science and there's an emotion. And I've definitely felt at points in my life where I don't want to ruin the emotion of this by being so scientific about everything. So there's always this kind of balance you want to find, and you want to be able to play, like literally play, have fun. But it's nice to know, like, okay, now that we're playing with this, here's how we can play with it more. And
yeah, exactly.
you guys did a great series on pre-choruses, and I just want to show you, like, my notebook here is
oh, I love it.
This is notes I took that you guys were talking about for the pre-chorus. Awesome. And I just loved that you really spelt out like the things that I think we try to do subconsciously. And now this is my label. I can change my melodic contour. I can change what the like syncopation of the rhythm is, or I can avoid a certain chord purposely to like leave it out. And it's really nice to just have this stuff that even if like I might kind of know it like inside, to just be able to say, all right, now I'm here and I want this part to like tease you for the chorus. Here are some things I can do, and here are some ways I can make it feel different. And that's always a tough thing in music, is coming up with like the B section or the next part, the bridge. Like, how do I already got this thing and it feels kind of complete. How do I bring in something else? And these are just what you guys did in that particular series of videos is just, here's like 10 different ways you can do it.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm really glad that you watched those and enjoyed them, because I feel like
I took notes. I just wanted to have it spelled out, just so I could have like, there are things I hang up sometimes. Actually, one of them is the modes of major, that it's a poster that Jake Lizio made. And just because I want to see it there so I can say, oh, let's just pull that chord out.
Totally. Yes. And, maybe Benny and I should have called those videos something more catchy because I feel like they are some of the like highest value videos we've made that get the lowest attention, because I think that people are like, pre-choruses, I don't know, like more people are interested, I think, in the chorus. But the secret to those videos is like writing a great pre-chorus is actually probably one of the best things you can do in terms of writing a banging chorus. Right. And to me, it's this idea of going like, right, if what you want is to write a chorus, like a thumping, like pop anthem chorus, actually knowing how to build the tension leading up to that moment is almost as important as the chorus itself. You know what I mean? It's like
so many things are like that.
Yeah.
I get asked all the time, how do I make this bass sound real big? How do I make the drums kick in heavy? It's almost less to do about that part, but the part that comes before it. You want the bass to feel heavy? Take it out before this section.
Exactly.
Cut out all the low frequencies, and then
totally.
Thin out your drums, and then have those all come in at normal in the next section.
Right, but it's going to feel by contrast. Different. Exactly.
The contrast.
Wow, that's such a cool concept.
And the juxtaposition is really the key to so many things.
Yes.
What is a big sound if you don't have a small sound? What is loud if you don't have quiet?
Exactly. That's such a cool concept. Yeah.
I love the way you guys laid that out, and I prefer to this a lot.
And like secretly, again, those pre-chorus videos are actually also, we could easily have called them like how to write a great bridge, because a pre-chorus and a bridge have a really similar function in a song. To me, and in some circles, people will call a pre-chorus a transitional bridge. Do you know what I mean? It's a bridging section between a verse and a chorus. What's the distinction between a bridge and a pre-chorus? Well, for me, a pre-chorus is this little bridge-like section that kind of has to precede two or more choruses. It's really, the distinction is essentially where does it fall in the song form, And so a pre-chorus is like a little bridge that happens before at least two choruses, basically. What is a bridge as opposed to a pre-chorus? Particularly if you're like, well, hang on, often the bridge will kind of come after the halfway point in the song and then go to a chorus. So isn't that a pre-chorus? Well, no, because usually it only happens once. You know what I mean? That's kind of the kind of nature of a bridge. But, even saying that, there are kind of exceptions to that. Like there are lots of songs that have bridges, like two bridges, that both return to a pre-chorus, but, I still wouldn't call them a pre-chorus. And look, there's kind of like nitty-gritty, I think, getting into that distinction. But all of that is to say, those concepts in that video of like, how do you write a great pre-chorus is really all about like, how do you create tension in a song section that then delivers the chorus, whether that's any chorus or whether like the final chorus coming after a bridge, right? Like how do you deliver the chorus again and kind of build that tension is really what those videos are about. So I think they're like some of the highest value, information on the channel. Yeah.
Right. just, I guess, 10 things you don't know about whatever would be, you know, the clickbait type title. But
Yeah, I've got a real clickbaity one that hopefully we'll record this weekend, which is which I've borrowed actually from like Adam Neely, has a lot of videos that like, did this person steal this thing? And, you know, I've got one that's like, did John Legend steal this progression? And, you know, just to forecast the answer to that question for, you know, people exclusive.
he did it.
You know.
He did.
No, he didn't. Well, it's like, yes, he did, and no, he didn't.
Right.
He did in the sense that it's the same chord progression that you can hear in this other song and this other song and this other song. But no, he didn't, because you can't steal a chord progression. There's no such thing as stealing a chord progression. And not only is there no such thing as stealing a chord progression, but maybe one of the books you got, Brian, was Steal Like an Artist, right? Like the idea is...
I've already read that one, but...
Oh, great.
Yeah, of
course. I remember that. We
Yeah.
did. Is, you know, this idea that actually stealing stuff is the way that you write songs and the way that you learn to write songs, not copyright infringement. That's not what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a distinction to be made here of like, what does it actually mean to steal like an artist? And I think that there is complexity and nuance in what that means, that if people have not read Austin Kleon's excellent book, Steal Like an Artist, that actually takes only about 45 minutes to read, I would highly recommend it. Again, I know we've talked about it last time, but, you know, the concept there is you're not plagiarizing, you're not just imitating, you're not ripping something off. But when you learn something, you can recontextualize it and repurpose it in your own songwriting. And look, there are kind of technical ways that you can do that. So like if you learn a bit of a chord progression that sounds great and you love it, it's like change the key, change the time signature, change the tempo, change the feel, maybe change the instrument that it's being played on, and then and also change its position in the song form, for example. And once you've got lyrics and melody, like it's no longer that chord progression from that song, it's yours, you know? And it's not copyright infringement, it's songwriting, you know what I mean? So, yeah, but I reckon that it's deliberately a clickbaity title. Like, did he steal this chord progression? The answer is actually no, you can't steal the chord progression.
Well,
you can kind of do what Austin Kleon calls bad theft, which is, you know, yes, maybe a little bit of like copyright infringement and like don't do that. But there's a kind of good theft, which is this idea of recontextualizing, remixing, don't steal from one, steal from many, use multiple influences and references in your work, you know, give credit where credit's due, you know, and that's good theft. And that's the way that, you know, creative people in all disciplines learn their craft, basically.
Yeah, that's just pulling in ingredients and figuring out what works in your own little blend. Yeah, well, his title, you know, Steal Like an Artist, is kind of got that like get your attention thing, and I think even some of the clickbait titles, if you want to look at it from this way of why do we click on it, it's because it creates tension. Because I want to know if I know all these 5 music production techniques that I need to know. You know,
right?
I want to know it. Did he steal it? I have now. You left me with this like question that doesn't have an answer, and as a human, I'm curious and nosy, and I want to know what's going on. So. It's a way to pull people in. I think it works also when we apply it to like the different parts of our music. Sometimes it's nice to create the tension and not deliver, or in those first lyrics, ooh, that was what's going on here. There's a problem. I need to know what happened. How did they solve it? So it's funny how it applies to a lot of these things. Yeah, it's like
clickbait titles.
Tension and release. We love it.
Totally.
Everything in life seems to be like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I was reading a book by actually an old friend of mine who's just released a book in Australia that's doing really well. It's called Facts and Other Lies, and it's basically about the disinformation age. So kind of basically like fake news, essentially. So he's kind of a political communications consultant, and is sort of unpacking the era of disinformation. And he has a really good thing in there that's all about kind of clickbait titles and why news, news providers and services like BuzzFeed and Huffington Post and all that kind of stuff, that why people are drawn to clickbait titles. And it's kind of exactly that. And he's kind of like, the thing is, if you give the answer in the title, people will just read the title. Do you know what I mean? If it's like family of 4 survives house fire, I don't actually need to read at all. I don't need to read. I don't need to click on it. I know the whole story. I know what happened. I know how it ended. There was a fire, there was a family, they all survived, thank goodness. But if the title is basically like, a family's home lights on fire and you'll never believe what happened, or you'll never believe how they survived, now I need to know. You know what I mean? Like, I know they survived, but like, how did they survive?
What this one family did to survive their fire.
Survive, yes, exactly.
Are you doing this?
So, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like funny conversation about clickbait titles. Like Benny and I talk about it all the time. Like, are we destroying our souls by making clickbait titles, or is it just like sparking people's attention? And ultimately, I kind of think it's fine. Like, as long as you are
there's so much
delivering
noise
on your promise and providing content.
Yeah. There is so much noise on the internet, and it's just the way it is, and you have to cut through somehow. And I mean, it could be a source of your discussion on songwriting. Even just, why did you click on this video? Because you wanted to know. We left that open loop for you that like you need to close off.
Yeah totally.
So we got to talk about Mothertongues.
Oh yeah.
I have to just like change the direction purposely, or else I don't think we'll get to it. Because there's so much cool stuff going on. First of all, this is, as far as you know and I know, that it's an audiobook with an album into it, which is such a cool merging of genres, or I guess not genres, but it's kind of like mediums.
Forms, mediums,
which is really interesting. And we were kind of talking beforehand too, just how it's a lot of the songwriting that went to it and how you were presented with. There's already some material to work with, and sometimes even lyrics. So do you want to tell us about the book a little bit? Listening to the music, it's great. It sounds awesome. I love the production, and the songs, of course, are great, and the performances.
So thank you. Yes. So basically Mothertongues is both a physical book and an audiobook that were both released on April 12. I believe that at least the audiobook is available internationally. So it's called Mothertongues, and the authors are Ceridwen Dovey and Eliza Bell. So basically the story of this book is it's a kind of genre-defying work of autobiofiction about the early stages of motherhood. Okay, and so the way that it started was Ceridwen and Eliza. Ceridwen is a writer. Eliza is a high school drama teacher. They became friends at the school gate, sort of dropping their kids at school, dropping their kids at daycare or whatever, and they kind of got talking, and they got talking about the creative process and how hard it is to make a long form work, as a woman and the mothers of kind of small children, and how it's very hard to achieve what if you are in the world of creative work and producing creative work, you kind of know is essential, which is uninterrupted time. Like you kind of need 90 minutes. And it's funny, isn't it? It's like you don't actually need that much to get a lot of work done. It's like if you're working on a book or an album or anything, it's like all you need is 90 minutes a day. And if you have 90 minutes of uninterrupted time to sit down and concentrate and follow a thought to its conclusion, you can get that shit done,
Mm.
But, being a parent of young children, you basically do not have access to 90 minutes of uninterrupted time. And they were kind of talking about that, but they actually decided, okay, how, instead of bemoaning, the situation, they were like, how do we problem solve this? What if we actually write a book together? Right? Firstly, what if we actually share the burden, of creating a major work of art together rather than in this kind of siloed solitude that firstly feels just super lonely and is like not productive, and we don't even have the time to do it. So they firstly said like, yeah, okay, what would that look like if we collaboratively wrote a book? And it's interesting, like as musicians and producers and songwriters, the concept of collaboration is kind of innate to our craft. Do you know what I mean? For most people. For me, it's actually a relatively new thing, to be honest. I mean, by new, I mean like 10 years old. And sort of like 10 years ago, I sort of started dabbling in collaboration and co-writing. The early part of my songwriting career was much more kind of solo songwriting, but working with bands. And so there was sort of collaborative stuff involved in that. But certainly for writers, the idea of collaboration is completely radical, so it was a radical move for them to decide to collaboratively write a work. And then they were even kind of problem solving this idea of like, how do we problem solve around this idea of it's very difficult to hold a thought long enough to create like long form narrative. And so they basically wrote this book in this completely multimodal form, which on the surface looks like fragments of ideas, like a sort of 300-word story, a poem, a shopping list, they have written little mini plays inside this book. They've written conversations between Siri and Alexa, talking about like, these AI assistants kind of pretending as if they are new mothers and kind of talking like in Siri and Alexa voices. And there's this amazing voice actor who voiced the audiobook, and she did such an incredible job of like voicing those characters. So look, the book is not a through-written narrative. It is this kind of interesting fragment multimodal thing. And then what happened was, part of what they did was they wrote song lyrics. And one thing I want to say is, this form that the book has taken is not just like cobbling together unrelated fragments. Part of it is this very deep and profound work that is representing in its form the experience of motherhood and parenthood.
Well, it sounds like the chaos. I'm not a parent, but I can imagine where just things are happening like crazy all the time. So it would make sense. Now we're in a play. Now we're in a poem. Now we're in a narrative.
But then it's also, yes. But then what it also got to is this point of like, well, very much like music, it's like, well, this particular experience is actually going to be best expressed not as a traditional narrative. It's going to be best expressed as a song. And that's kind of what happened. So they ended up... oh, sorry, I've got like a leaf blower behind me. Hopefully it won't take too long, but... they would write something as a song. And then what happened was I knew Kerrod I've known her for decades. So we actually kind of went to high school together. We weren't in the same grades, but she was in my sister's grade. My sister was in 2 grades above me. And so we've kind of known each other, and I followed her work as an author over the last 2 decades. And she's followed my work as a songwriter. And we just kind of, we would orbit each other's art world, kind of paying attention to what we were doing. And then at the moment where she had written some song lyrics, she kind of called me and was like, Eliza and I have written some song lyrics. We don't really even know what that means in terms of how do you take something that in your mind is a song lyric, but then to turn it into an actual lyric and then turn that lyric into a song. Like, would you mind running a little workshop for us to kind of look at what we've written and talk about what you would do as a songwriter to turn what we think are song lyrics into an actual song. And so that's where it started. Like I ran basically like a 2 or 3 hour songwriting workshop for them, and kind of said, look, if like you've got these raw kind of lyrics here are the things that I would do and the kind of principles. And I was kind of explaining the underlying principles to them as well, of kind of saying, well, one thing is song form, so understanding song form, but there are different song forms. But it's not just understanding song forms, it's understanding the function of the different sections in the song form. So even having a conversation about like, what is a chorus? And one of the things I say, and, we've got a couple of videos on the YouTube channel about writing choruses, is, a chorus is not merely the bit where the lyrics repeat, And I think a lot of songwriters would struggle to define a chorus with any more depth than that. And I say that, and all I'm doing is actually talking about myself as a young songwriter. Like, as a young songwriter, I would write songs with choruses, but I wouldn't have been able to explain to you why, this particular bit was the chorus, other than, well, it's the bit where the lyrics repeat, but underneath that is like, okay, well, intuitively there might have been a reason why I was repeating those lyrics, right? But actually, circling back to our very first conversation here, it's like actually having language or understanding of the principles of what makes a chorus, more than just the lyrics that repeat. Like, what is its function in the song form is really helpful to then crafting a lyric and crafting a really satisfying song that communicates emotionally, right? Like, to a listener, where a listener feels like they have had an emotional experience and like feel connected to the song. And remember it long enough for it to kind of linger and have a lasting effect, or even, lasting might even be for the day, but that's enough. That's enough for it to have kind of served its purpose. So part of that workshop was kind of talking about song form, song function, different, what does this section do? What does that do? What are your choices here? And then looking at the lyrics that they actually had, and me kind of saying, like, for example, this song might not be a song with a chorus, but if a song doesn't have a chorus, it still needs a repeating thing, because in an oral form like songwriting, it's different to poetry. It's different to words on a page. Because it's oral, a listener much more needs lyrics that repeat. They need something to repeat to constantly ground them in the central idea, image, or emotion of the song, right? And so the aspect of repetition in songs is something that feels like almost like an evolved characteristic of song. It's like, why do we have choruses and why do we have hooks? It's because those features of songs turn out to be really effective in a song because of how it is consumed by a listener. We need more repetition because we can't see the words on the page. We don't remember what happened, 30 seconds ago. We kind of need a reminder of what the point is to really emotionally connect to any of the lyrics. So, part of it was going, all right, with these particular lyrics, it might not be a song with a chorus, but what can replace the function of a chorus? Well, some songs have refrain lines, which is a line of lyric that repeats in 2 or more verse sections, and usually is the last line or the first line, right? And if you don't have a chorus, having that refrain line replaces the function, and it still makes the song a really deep, communicative experience for a listener. It reminds them what the song is about and lets them connect to all the lyrics, and lets them develop a deeper and deeper relationship with the bit that repeats. That to me is gold standard songwriting. It's like not just that the bit repeats, but that when it does repeat, it actually kind of means something deeper and more profound the second time we hear it and the third time we hear it. That's what kind of creates real like emotional connection for a listener. So kind of talking about that stuff. So all of that is to say, we did this little songwriting workshop. They then cleaned up the song lyrics that they had in kind of proper song form, and then essentially commissioned me to set those songs to music. So the first thing that happened was I said yes and set about that project. And so kind of for one of the first times in my life was kind of writing music to lyrics that I had not written. And there were certain things that I changed, right? Like when I started bringing the music in, maybe I wanted to actually repeat this thing more, or I wanted to shift that lyric around, or I needed to change the rhythm of the line, to sort of fit the melody and have a better kind of scansion pattern, which is a whole other like technical land of songwriting and melody writing. But so there were still things that kind of changed and altered a little bit, but fundamentally I had not written the lyrics. I was really writing the music. And that was an interesting experience for me, like kind of making other conscious, deliberate choices, almost like a film composer. Do you know what I mean? You've kind of got the story in front of you, and it's your job as the film composer to kind of let the music tell a different story, or do you know what I mean? Like have those two things come together to be more than the sum of their parts, is the sort of ideal way that you go about it. And so that was an interesting experience. So essentially what happened then is that Keridwen and Eliza then had the manuscript of the book, had these 3 basically demos is what I had, like I sort of, high quality demos, kind of like soft produced demos that I had written of these songs, pitched those to Penguin Random House, who bought the project, who sort of loved it and were open-minded enough to see this quite like crazy project, very left of center, but saw the value in it. And I think also visionary enough to kind of, as we were talking about, actually go, oh, having a album worth of original songs in an audiobook is going to really enhance the audio experience, and I, like you were saying, I think that this audiobook is one of the first in the world to have a full album of original songs written specifically for the project, kind of intertwined and interspersed throughout the audiobook. But it's such an obvious thing, and I really hope that there are more of it. And in fact, in kind of releasing it, we sort of discovered that there are actually maybe 3 or 4 others that are being released this year. I think in Australia, which kind of indicates maybe there's a bit of a zeitgeist thing. You know what I mean? Maybe we're just sort of collectively at this moment where everyone's figured it out at the same time, and I hope so. I really hope that it becomes a standard form, and it's just an obvious thing to do in an audiobook, is to have that richness, because as we were saying before, it's like, firstly, why not? And secondly, like, some things are better expressed in song, and it just adds a whole other layer of emotion and storytelling in the audio format of an audiobook. So that's kind of the story of Mothertongues. So there you go.
It's a nice fit too with the overall theme of motherhood, because motherhood has those like comforting moments of singing a child to sleep, or trying to make them feel better with song. Even women that don't sing to their children for that reason. So it kind of nicely fits into this overall picture that you guys are painting.
Yeah, totally. And not that all the songs they're not, some of the songs are like thematically much darker, than that. But you're totally right. Yeah.
But on the whole, I think that's, a cool feature. I've only heard the music, so I haven't seen the book or heard the book, but I like that it has this kind of like all over the place, no genre, because there is no genre for this. And it has these, sometimes we're in this mode and sometimes we're in that mode. And to me, that just fits overall. That's something you were talking about too, about applying the squeeze. You gave me that term, which is also a nice way to put it. I always tell people, I think, that the problem of like the modern music producer and songwriter these days is really just too many choices. There's so many options. You can make any kind of song, any kind of style, with every preset in the world, every sound that's ever been created, infinite tracks. There's just no end to what you can decide to do. And when I was coming up, I had a guitar, so that's what I had to play. And that was it. And if I had a drum, I could record that too. It's gotten much harder to even decide what I want to make half the time. So you were talking about this. I like the way you put it in a kind of a catchy phrase, apply the squeeze. But it seems like in this, the squeeze had already kind of been applied for you in a lot of ways.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, right. So this idea of applying the squeeze to me is a concept that I think about in all kind of songwriting or projects, right? Which is essentially, as you were saying, like applying limitations, and actually that the creative part of a project is not just choosing from all available options. The creative part is problem solving your way out of limited options, or not limited options, but limited material. You know what I mean? Like that it's like the problem solving is actually the creative aspect of it. And so in fact, applying limitations to yourself is a essential part of the creative process. But yes, what was really liberating about this project was it came with thematic parameters, right? So thematically, it was about motherhood and like all the songs. So then what happened was, once Penguin bought the project, I was then commissioned to write another 5 songs. But they all had to be about motherhood, which was a great thematic squeeze, and I loved it, and it was really liberating and really creative, and suddenly to be like, right, for the next 6 months, I'm writing nothing but songs about motherhood, and that's just so great. And obviously, like within that is everything as well, which is also
broad anyway.
Great, you know what I mean? But it kind of reminds me of this John Mayer quote, which I wrote a bit of a blog post about a few months ago, and I really love. It was an interview. It's on YouTube. It's an interview, with possibly like Apple. I'll find it and I'll send you the link so that you can include it in the show notes. But there's a great bit in this interview where John Mayer is talking about how he finds that he experiences something like writer's block when he's trying to write big songs. And he sort of talks about this idea of them being like glacially big, like just trying to write about love or trying to write about heartbreak or trying to write about some massive concept that, like, if a song starts from this huge place, that he finds those songs really difficult to write, and get stuck and can't kind of move forward because he's trying to fit the universe into a glass of water. But what he says is, but if he actually starts with the glass of water instead, if you actually start with the small thing and just write about that small thing, that what you find is a week or two later, when you look at that glass of water, you find that the universe is in it anyway. And so to me, it's the idea of the squeeze. It's like this limited thing, you know what I mean? It's like not trying to do everything. It's like not starting with, okay, I'm going to sit down and write a song today. That for me is like an impossible task. I'm going to sit down and write a song today is a great way to like sit there and noodle for 30 minutes and get nowhere. It's like always in that process somewhere is me applying a squeeze or applying limitations. And so for this project, right, it's kind of like, well, the glass of water in this case, or maybe it's a big glass of water, it's a jug of water, was like, write some songs about motherhood. And it turns out that if you write songs thematically about that one thing, they're going to contain the universe anyway. Do you know what I mean? There's going to be songs in there about love, about heartbreak, about disappointment, about frustration, about, confronting your limitations, about, having to give up on some idealized version of yourself, having, you know what I mean? It's like within that one experience is all experiences for all people at all times across cultures. Maybe I'm too broad, that I should contain that a little bit. No, they can't like represent all people, but, at least for me, thematically, the emotions that come up are emotions or stories that emotionally feel universal to my life. Right. They're not actually just about motherhood. They're sort of thematically about much bigger things. But the squeeze of limiting thematically was really, really helpful, and something that I seek out at that kind of macro level, you know what I mean? Which is to say, like, thematically limiting myself with my songwriting. And so one way that I do that on a kind of weekly basis, now that I'm not working on that specific project, is through my songwriting group. So I have a songwriting group that's, me and 9 other songwriting friends of mine who I invited into the group. And I sort of host the group, which all that means is that I send us out a prompt every 2 weeks. And so, the squeeze for everyone and why everyone loves it. And I run other songwriting groups, like, sort of open to anyone to join. And I'll create a link and I'll send that to you as well for anyone listening who wants to be part of a songwriting group. But like the squeeze there's like 2 squeezes that work really well for people. One squeeze is having a prompt, and that prompt can be, you can respond to it in any way. It's like, right, the prompt might end up being the title, or it might just be thematic. Do you know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to appear in the lyric at all, or it might just inspire a thought, or your brain might laterally associate to something else, but it wouldn't have done that unless you had the prompt. And so people love the songwriting group simply, just for the prompt. It's like, no, it's not just write anything and be paralyzed by the endless possibilities or trying to write the universe. It's like, no. One of the prompts that I, really enjoyed and everyone enjoyed was one week I sent the prompt, and the prompt was laundry. And it's like the challenge of being like, how do I take that prompt and turn it into a song? And the songs were great. It's like the problem solving around something that seems counterintuitive to like a song, is just excellent. And like for me, right, like the way that worked is I started with the prompt laundry. I just kind of like free associated like what are things about laundry. And at some point as I was kind of just writing little words and phrases was like rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And then I was like, oh, now that's a good song title. I like rinse and repeat as a song title. And so then I was like, and what does it even mean? Like rinse and repeat. Well, to me, I was like, okay, well, it's about repetition and it's about maybe someone's day kind of being the same every time, and that's really distressing. And then it actually like connected immediately to an experience that I was having where, this is like a pretty dark story, but last year there was like a young couple that moved into an apartment block nearby, and they were embroiled in a really awful situation of domestic violence, basically. And we're both like heroin addicts. It was horrible for everyone. It was horrible for them. It was horrible for everyone around them. And, I just got thinking like about these kind of relationships and that they just were on the same cycle every day, and look, gosh, it's so complex, that stuff. And cycle, there was a really, really dark cycle. And then I got thinking about how do people even get into these relationships? And it kind of got me thinking about, well, a lot of it comes from modeling and, they've experienced something in their own history or their own upbringing that means that they don't have a different idea or vision of what a intimate relationship can and should be like or feel like. And so these relationships are just generational trauma repeating themselves over and over again, so we started with laundry, we ended up with generational trauma, and cycles repeating themselves. And that's what that song ended up being about. So, applying the squeeze of like a weekly prompt is really good. And the other squeeze that exists in these songwriting groups is simply a deadline. It's like you have to write a song every 2 weeks and there's a deadline, and that squeeze is great, So having a prompt, having a deadline, and also having a community of people, I think is another great kind of context, that gives you a sense of accountability, which is another type of squeeze. But look, all of that stuff is not specifically related to Mothertongues. And even within this project, it's like having these lyrics in these songs, there was a thematic squeeze. And then what I found really useful is putting sort of musical parameters around it, and kind of having a bit of a vision for what I wanted the album to sound like and feel like. And to me, I kind of wanted it to sound like a Laura Marling album. That's what I was going for, and it's not even, that kind of direction isn't even specific. It was more, one of the lyrics that was sent to me early on kind of has a lot of folk tale around motherhood and children language in it. Like it has a lot of references to like the Hansel and Gretel story, and it doesn't ever specifically reference any of those stories by name, but a lot of the imagery in the song lyrics are drawing from the specific imagery from those kind of folk tales that feature children and parents doing awful things, basically, right? Like it's like really dark folk tales of like sending children off. So there was something about it that felt like I wanted it to feel dark but beautiful, and when I was like thinking about the kinds of artists and albums that give me the feeling that I was going for, I was like, Laura Marling albums give me that feeling, or some of them do, and then kind of digging in more specifically into what that is, and some, it's the kind of lyrical stuff, but it's also song arrangement and instrumental arrangement. And that's when I sort of started to seek out the producers that I wanted to work with, and kind of knew. And I am someone who I really like acoustic instruments, and I specifically, for me, even I was like, I want the cello to feature very strongly on this album, because to me, the cello is this instrument that represents that. It is like dark and rich and melancholy, but also just beautiful. And I don't know, it sounds like the feeling I wanted to create with this record. And in kind of talking about it with a friend of mine who ended up being the producer, she was basically like, oh, well, my partner, Damien, is a professional cellist. And it turns out he's not just a professional cellist, he's like single-handedly the most extraordinary cellist I've ever seen with my own eyes. Like I've never, seen Yo-Yo Ma play live,
Right.
but he is so good. And turns out is like, it's unfair. He's like equally as good on the guitar and can kind of do everything. So, and Maria as well, who is my friend, is also a multi-instrumentalist and incredible arranger and producer. And it just turned out that like through talking to them, I was like, these are definitely the people who need to produce this record, because I had this kind of sonic vision and had a few like specifics that I wanted, and they kind of could bring all of that to the project and the same kind of sensibility that I was going for. So, sort of these, the seeking out limitations to me, I think, is like broadly the theme that kind of helps me bring something to completion.
I noticed that the overall sound of the album was very rustic, organic, acoustic, and not a lot of like, your voice is very dry. It's not overwhelmed in effects and reverb. It gives it like this like honesty and realness that I think fits the theme. And I guess as you're pointing out, like when you get this central idea, this theme down, a lot of these other really huge decisions just kind of fall into place.
Yeah.
It would be weird if I put this on and it was like an EDM record. I would have been like, well, that was a surprise, like wasn't expecting that for what I knew about it going in. But, as soon as it started playing, I was like, oh, okay. Like I get the vibe here. It's cohesive.
Yeah, totally. Cohesive and and there are like electric guitars on the record, but it's a lot of cello, piano, acoustic guitar, sort of percussion, but kind of light kit, and other kind of hand percussion. A lot of the percussion is created by the cello, like, do you mean like tapping and banging on the cello
cool.
in a number of songs. Sometimes we used created sort of percussive things by like sticking our hands into an upright piano and kind of creating textures inside, the piano, whether that was kind of muting and kind of plucking strings inside the piano or kind of knocking around in there. And I also love that about Maria and Damien. They're very, they want to create all their own textures, and kind of use what's in their space to kind of create
playful
the textures.
Like a child too, to not play the instrument the right way.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But to me, I totally agree. There was something about the thematic stuff of motherhood that, there's something about acoustic instruments and where the vibrations are created by the physical instrument and by like the hand or breath or mouth of a human, that is touch. It's like sound as touch, which I really, is thematically very much obviously like connected to motherhood, where that kind of sort of viscerality and physicality and sound as touch, and touch as sound and all that kind of stuff is really, really such a physical experience. So yes, that the importance of acoustic instruments as the central kind of theme and creating that sound environment was very important and kind of, exactly as you said, like it was one of the first big things to fall into place, which kind of defined the songwriting and the approach to the songs when it came to production. Yeah,
I think looking back, those are like the things that have helped my projects get finished. The ones that don't get finished are the ones that never really got the unifying element together. Even just specific songs, they just, it's a cool beat and it's a cool guitar part or it's a cool synth line, but it doesn't have the thing, the guide, the direction.
Yeah, and maybe it's something as simple as like in those projects, I wonder if this is true for you. I'm interested to know that like, well, the ones that do work, that it doesn't even have to be like a big vision for the song. Or it can simply be like, oh, this bit connects to this other bit for this reason. And it's like almost closing the loop. Do you know what I mean? It's like, now there's like a circle around this song and like why. Again, it comes back to that storytelling aspect of like, maybe the song kind of progresses when you have that moment of going, well, this beat feels good because the image that I have in mind for this song is like footsteps through snow. And as soon as you're like, those two things connect, then it's like, well, now that you have the image of like snow or like walking through a field of snow, then suddenly it becomes a lot clearer of like, well, now this sound doesn't actually fit that anymore, but this one does. Or like, it's like just two things connecting at a point, like an electrical circuit board or something, give it that flow that kind of creates the world or the direction for this one song. I'm not even saying that there's lyrics about snow. I'm just saying that it's something connecting with something else in the song to give it the limit or the circle around it that you're working in.
Yeah.
Does that apply to you? Do you feel that way with your songwriting?
I mean, I think it's the difference when things get finished and when they don't. You remind me a lot of an experience I had writing an album of songs with one of my friends. We did these songs, they're called social story songs, and they're designed for kids that are like autistic or on the spectrum that have trouble with social situations. And my buddy that I did this with, he's a special ed teacher, and they use social stories. So they'll tell a story about being in a restaurant. This is like what you're supposed to do, and it becomes a story and something you remember. And he always brought in music as well as a means to get them on board with him. So he came up with this idea of making them into songs. And now we're writing these songs about like common social behaviors and the right thing to do. And the concept was you're going to sing these to the kids rather than scold them. So instead of saying like, the one that comes to mind is our fingers don't belong there.
Right. Yeah.
But instead of saying, hey, keep your hands to yourself, we could sing, keep your hands to yourself, and like make the song out of it. So it's not confrontational. So we had this unifying idea. And then, of course, one of the main goals of this is they have to be catchy and fun and easily accessible. And they're not going to be artistic statements on, how smart we are with music. They're going to be straight to the point and clear. And it was one of the easiest projects as far as just like coming up with ideas and songs and like lyrics. Everything just flowed out of it because we knew our audience, we knew the point, we knew the purpose. And we also knew like, well, we're not going to have like our crazy death metal track on this because that doesn't fit with our audience. Totally. And things fell together so easily. It was just a breeze and a lot of fun too, because it took away the I'm an artist and I need to be artistic. All that like stupid pressure we put on ourselves to be like intelligent about our music. And
I just love the concept of like songs in service of something or other people as well. And I think that's a really important concept, like, I mean, I think generally it's an important concept for songwriters to kind of, one of the things, again, initial concepts I always talk about in any songwriting class is like the difference between catharsis and communication. And like communication is really the moment where you go, I no longer am only writing songs for the purposes of like processing my experience and kind of giving form to my world, which is completely valid. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not a hierarchy of value, but it is a different function. Do you know what I mean? That's the whole thing I'm trying to express there is like songwriting can serve different functions. Sometimes songwriting's function is catharsis, which is really important. But if what you're doing is catharsis, you can't expect and shouldn't expect that other people will listen to those songs and enjoy them, because not everyone, because it's an emotional dump and that doesn't feel good for other people. Do you know what I mean? It's not providing a listener value to experience or take on your emotional dump, unless they have consented to that, and that's the nature of your relationship. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Oh yeah,
that's really important.
Music where that's what it is, and it feels great when you're there, but I just can't listen to it at other points.
Yes. As opposed to music that is like communication, which is the moment where you actually go, the function of this, my goal for this is not merely to express or process my hard emotions or experiences. It is to communicate to other people. Like, what does communication mean? Communication, if you even like break down that word, like the part of communication, as in community, means coming together, right? Or like joining around something. And then what else is in that word? Communication actually has the word unity in it, right? It's coming together around some single idea, right? And so to me, it's this like unification, like coming together around something. It involves, to me, an exchange of value or like an exchange of service. Do you know what I mean? So communication songs are different to catharsis songs in the sense that they're you're writing a song that's no longer just about you and for you. It is about your listener and for your listener as well. It doesn't mean that it can't be about your experience, but when you're like, I actually want someone listening to this song to feel like this song represents them as well, like that it is about their experience. It's about our experience. It's not just me and my world. There are different decisions that you make, and to me, there is an element of like, maybe not exactly service, but to me, there's like this broad concept of like, but the difference between catharsis and communication involves wanting your song to serve a purpose for someone else, not just them bearing witness to your trauma or your like experiences, but actually it kind of healing them in some way or kind of doing something for them, and that's a service. That's like the service aspect of music. But I even love the more like micro aspect of service in your project of being like, not just generally, but specifically like these songs are for these specific people for this specific purpose. And I would even just say like, even in building a career as a songwriter, not even in terms of the craft of songwriting, but like as a career as a songwriter, like this concept of like, how can you find a way to be of service to other people is a really great way to build an audience, and like mine and Benny's YouTube channel is a great example of that. All your stuff is a great example of that. Do you know what I mean? Like you are providing information and a service that is of value to other people in what they're trying to do and they're trying to achieve. And even like, someone on YouTube like Mary Spender, do you know what I mean? Like she totally makes an independent living as an artist and people are interested in her original music because her YouTube channel is actually providing a service in other way. Like she's sort of reviewing other things and talking about music and talking about production, talking about guitars and, doing all kinds of other stuff that isn't specifically about her songwriting, but she's providing value and providing a service for other people. There's a great, I wish I could remember her name. It's Kathy something. And I feel like I got this reference from Austin Kleon. But this woman who is like a marketing expert, again, I'll see if I can find it and send you the link, but I may not be able to. But Kathy something. What was her name? Kathy something. Anyway, she had this great sort of article that she wrote on marketing that was basically like one of the best strategies you can employ to market anything that you are trying to market or sell to people is to figure out how to out-teach your competition. Like if you can figure out how to teach people what you're doing, you're providing a real service, a real value. And that can often be like the way into building an audience that you're providing value to, and then they can see the value in music. And music is a really hard thing, specifically. It's like obviously it has a huge social value generally, but specifically like you as an individual artist, it's like what value are you providing? Why would someone listen to your music and not someone else's music where there's so much music out there? That's a really tough call. I mean, it's like really hard to figure out why would someone listen to yours and not someone else's, and so I think it's a challenge for every single artist and every single songwriter to answer that question, is like, what value am I providing that is of value to people. That means that they would exchange their time, their attention, and maybe even their like money in order that I can continue, you know, sustainably like doing this work. Like, what value are you providing? And it's like music has a general value, but you've got to figure out how you're going to provide specific value to people. And it doesn't have to be just the music itself. You know, I think, well, look, I'm veering into a territory that's more about marketing than about music production or songwriting, but
well,
it's all connected.
Even a lot of like, you know, the big pop stars that are doing it off their music, they're themselves are stars, like their life, there's pictures of them coming out of the, you know, coffee shop because they're interesting, and they're providing people with someone to connect to look up to, or to, you know, I go through that too. I think
Totally.
it's not just, it's, you know, the question when you first hear a song, the question people always ask is, who is this? Who are we listening to? You know, it's not just, we can't just have the song always. I think it always comes back to who it is, which is kind of why I think we don't have to worry about AI taking over, you know, and just like machine learning songs getting written, and we're just like, oh, this is a great song, I really connect with it, because we still want to know, like, who is this person? You know, what are they? What is it? And a lot of, you know, our decisions, you know, fashion decisions come from like artists we like, you know, who we wanted to be like or look like, and there's something more there besides just the song itself.
Oh, totally. I mean, God, the psychology of storytelling and how a story can literally alter the way that your brain perceives reality, you know, which is to say, like, a good example of that is like wine. You know, it's like there are all these research studies that show like the story that you tell about a glass of wine will change the way that people taste it, you know. It's like what they pay attention to in the taste, and what they perceive as quality, or, you know, it's just amazing how our brains will respond to story and change our perception of reality, you know, based on the story that's told about something. So yes, I do, you know, I think, and that story, I think the sort of value that you provide in that storytelling, I mean, that's sort of an abstract concept, but yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you that you know, particularly for like pop stars or functioning in that world, I mean, you know, another word for that is brand, I guess. And then like, what value is that brand providing to people? Why are they coming back to that brand? But there is like a value proposition in all brands, you know, that's not just the actual music in this case. You know, it has to do with the brand and what value the brand is providing to someone's life.
Yeah. It's not just the t-shirt or the look of the logo. It is that something else there.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes it's just identity, you know. Sometimes it's about like the value is I identify this way and therefore I'm part of this group. And that kind of in-group identity definition is a high value proposition for a lot of people.
It makes a lot of sense to what you're saying about how you can't write the epic song about the broad concept. You kind of need to get specific to the glass of water. And while you were telling me that story, I was thinking about, you ever see these like little Pixar shorts? They're the little cartoons before the movie that they do. I use these a lot in my English classes to talk about central idea. Like, what is the theme of this? And there's one that I show, I think it's called Piper. And it's about these little like piping plover birds. You know, they live right on the shore of the water. And there's a baby that's getting fed by his parents or her parents or its parent, whatever, you know. And suddenly the parents stop feeding the baby. And now the baby has to go to the shore where the water's breaking and pick out like the clam or whatever little sea creature that is in the sand right before the wave comes. But he's too terrified of the water, so he can't do it, and he can't do it. And so finally, you know, he does it and he gets something and he gets caught in the wave and winds up having a great time and loves it and then is playing in the water. But in that story, and it's like 5 minutes long, it brings you almost to tears watching this little bird go through all of these things. I'm not a bird. don't live at the water picking out sea creatures and, all that kind of stuff. But I connect with like the fear, the like the sense of
Risk-taking.
the risk taking, the danger, and then the joy of like the thrill, all of those things. Like those are big ideas, but they're told in this so specific story that is nothing like my life, but at the same time, exactly like my life.
Oh, totally. And like the flip side is when like a storyteller in whatever genre or form goes too far in the opposite direction and then tries to like hit you over the head with the moral story, or like, and is then like, and the moral of the story is, do you know what I mean? It's like, then you feel insulted. It's like, or then you feel like patronized or something. Like there is this magic thing of like, in that specificity, there is the relatability, and you can discuss these big themes, but if you try and like tell people what the moral of the story is rather than letting people experience it for themselves, it's such a delicate line,
Yeah. Well, in a way, I mean, that little short is completely enjoyable, just watching the little bird do its thing.
Yeah,
I know
totally.
when Walt Disney did Snow White, the first time he did like a full-length featured movie, and the scene when Snow White is laying there and all the dwarfs come and they take their hat off, and they say like they were shocked that people were crying. Like, it's a cartoon, like why are people crying, But they realized the power of storytelling. Like the seven dwarfs and the wicked. This is all make believe, but it's not at the same time. It's very real what they're going through and what's happening, and that's why it moves people so much.
Oh, totally. I mean, I would actually say, and we might have to kind of wrap it up because I got to go and teach a class in 5 minutes. But I would say one of the like meta themes of my life and thinking, and I've heard in an episode of one of my favorite podcasts, which is the podcast On Being with Krista Tippett. She was talking to someone, I can't remember who, but she kind of referred to these things as like one's animating questions, that people have these like animating like what is a question in life that animates you, and kind of drives everything. And I would say behind everything I do is literally that question of like, why do humans need stories and storytelling? Like, we create these fictions, right? Like, and I feel it. And to me, it's this animating question because I'm an avid reader of fiction. It feels like I need it. And I know not everyone is like that, but I would say broadly, humans and our civilization, we need stories. And whether it's because you read fiction or because you watch movies, or we can't escape it. You know what I mean? It is part of our human brain, is storytelling. And to me, I will like read a book of fiction that feels essential. I feel like my brain needs it. And I'll get to the end and be like, but why? Like, why is it that I needed to hear this completely made up story, and why does that feel like essential to me? And even that animating question applies to music. It's like, why? Why do we need music? And music is kind of a form of storytelling. And like, what is it that it does for us and our brains and our, I mean, I know that people have written books and do PhDs on this very question, but it's like a fascinating question to me, is like the power of stories and storytelling and why, other animals don't need them. I mean, that's why, right? Like, that's why humans are humans, is storytelling the thing, it's like, and everything that came with it, like language and the prefrontal cortex and all that kind of stuff. But it's like tories are deeply, deeply, deeply like genetically, biologically ingrained in the thing we need. I always kind of, I always think about like the apocalypse. It's like, what will we be doing when the apocalypse arrives? It's like when buildings burn down and there's no internet and we're all sitting around campfires once again. Like, what are the things we'll be doing? We will be eating, hunting, having sex, and and dancing and making music and telling stories. Do you mean like dancing, making music and telling stories is, to me, it's so interesting because I think people on like, you know, Marlowe's hierarchy of human needs, those things are probably considered like the last things we do, you know. That's why I think Marlowe was wrong, you know. It's like, you know, a brazen, you know, undermining of like a huge tenet of like human psychology. But I think there's more nuance to it, to be like, to consider dance and music and art and storytelling as luxuries does not represent what we actually experience and know of human society and human survival. You know, that we actually dance and sing and tell stories to survive. You know, that is my last big thought before I have to check out and go.
Maybe
and
we'll
teach
leave
class.
everyone with that question. Why? Why?
Why?
But check out Mothertongues. They should do that. Really cool stuff. And of course, check out How to Write Songs on YouTube and the website as well. The links are all in the show notes. Thank you again for taking the time to stop by.
Brian.
The invitation is always open.
Pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Cheers.
Hey, if you enjoyed the Music Production Podcast, please consider giving it a review on your favorite podcast provider and share it with a friend, somebody that you think might enjoy the show and get something out of it. That would mean a lot to me. And if you want to check out more of my work, including sound packs, tutorials, etc., head over to brianfunk.com. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.